Welcome to another edition of Research Fantasy presents our NBA Fantasy Baller DFS edition. I'm your host, Nick Valinchak, better known as Nick from CWE on all of your favorite daily fantasy sites, and I'm here to give you my take on this very small NBA slate on Monday, April 17th, 2017. It's very tough for me to imagine still that we are in the playoffs. It really does seem like just yesterday we were tipping off the basketball, and all I can say is that thank goodness for PGA and NASCAR this year, because I really don't know what I was going to do with myself staring down the pike at basically just baseball left to play. So 2 games on this slate. I think it's a really lopsided slate, and I'm not going to be surprised to see most players gravitate towards one game just due to the lack of excitement the other brings on paper. The game that I'm assuming most move to will be Indiana at Cleveland. Very good game in the first one, like I've said in the articles I've written, even coming down the stretch, that the Cavs are just going to have a tough time. I mean, I don't know whether it was a situation where they won the championship and just cashed out mentally and figured they really didn't need to do too much more, but the defensive ability is just not there. You know, Paul George would have been in for a huge game, except he just didn't do anything in the fourth quarter. I don't think you can bank on that happening twice in a row. That's my starting point for Indiana. And you have to understand, like, these games are all going to be different. It's not going to be just, okay, these are the guys that did well in the first game, so let's just copy, paste, rinse, and repeat 4 games, 2, 3, 4, and so on, if there is some. So you have to look at Jeff Teague, you have to look at Thaddeus Young, you have to look at Miles Turner. I'm going to bet that one of those guys exceeds 5x value tonight. Maybe 2 of them. Still do like Paul George, though. I mean, I'm not going to come off of him just because he didn't do great. Moving on to the Cleveland side of and then Lance Stevenson. Lance Stevenson is a guy, I think, who showed his tenacity and the reason why they brought him in. And I think collectively the entire NBA universe laughed when they saw him sign a 3-year deal with the Pacers, myself including. Figured that he really somehow pulled one over on them. But his early returns have been reasonable for this team. I mean, they definitely needed someone who can come off the bench. Monta Ellis, for the most part this year, just wasn't consistent. And I'm not saying Lance Stevenson is going to be, but thus far, he looks pretty strong. So, wouldn't hate playing him. If you really want to go, contrarian, you can talk Monta Ellis. I think he'll have some depressed ownership considering the fact that he didn't look too good in the first game. All right, moving on to Cleveland. It is what it is. It's going to be LeBron James first and foremost. You could run with some Kyrie. You could run with some Kevin Love. Both of those guys underperformed. Kevin Love very much so underperformed, but he's priced significantly lower than Kyrie. I don't hate the plays. Again, you're going to run into a situation where you're going to have more guys that perform on different levels, but for Cleveland, that's where all the offensive production is going to be isolated. Tristan Thompson didn't do a poor job. He finished right around 5x on the opening playoff slate, so I don't hate him. Going into their bench and all that, with the way they structure how the offense is on the court, I just don't think they need to have a bench guy who's doing exceedingly well. You know, LeBron plays with the second unit, and as long as LeBron's on the floor, he's going to be the guy getting the ball. So we're just trying to talk ourselves into something that isn't there by trying to find some of these cheaper plays. So that's where I'd kind of restrict my play on the Cavaliers. Moving on to Memphis, San Antonio. The Spurs are talented enough to shut these guys out the entire series. Memphis is a team that's struggling because, and I mean, just quite frankly and honestly, like, they brought Chandler Parsons in because they thought Parsons was going to be like the third part of their well-oiled machine with Conley and Gasol, and, you know, he didn't really play much at all this season, and to make matters worse, like, he's not even a part of the playoff team. So I think that I think that impacts things quite a bit. You know, Gasol and Conley are still players you have to look at, because if Memphis is going to stand a chance in this series, it's going to be because those two are playing very well. Zach Randolph didn't have great offensive output, but he's the most likely candidate to bounce back. Price is fair for what he brings to the table. He's a guy who can easily go over 30 fantasy points, so he feels he's underpriced for his upside, but he's priced maybe overpriced relative to what he had been bringing to the table prior to this. Beyond that, I mean, you could look at guys like James Ennis that are seeing the minutes with Tony Allen out. Vince Carter has a pretty strong role on this team. If he can do some scoring, he's going to be a guy that can produce some value for you as well. Moving over to the San Antonio Spurs side of things, actually like quite a few guys on this side of the matchup. Kawhi Leonard, trying to convince people that James Harden and Russell Westbrook are not the only MVP candidates here. Did a good job of it in the opening game. See no reason why that's going to change. Leonard he's the heartbeat of this team, no questions asked. So we definitely want to take a little bit of time to look at Kawhi. I expect to see a lot of like Kawhi, LeBron combinations at a relatively weak position there, and that makes sense. LaMarcus Aldridge is a guy that, if you had a reason to play cash games, which I assure you there are none, he's a guy that I would probably look at because he's pretty consistent, pretty stable. And when you're talking about a 2-game slate, and I've already mentioned, like, most of these guys just didn't even come close to hitting their 5x markers. I mean, Aldridge did. He had like 31 some fantasy points. He needs 32.5 to hit 5x value. Like, if he's going to be able to do that, then I think we're talking about a big reason to have him in our lineups. Really like Tony Parker. I think he's going to have to do a lot more. I think that the first game was just a sign of things to come. So at his price, I really like him. Outside of that, I'm looking at Danny Green, which is admittedly something that I just never like to say that I'm doing. I'm looking at Danny Green because he's defense and not really offense. But again, if this guy is going to be priced under 4K and he's going to butt up right against that 20-point mark on a slate like this, that's a guy you have to consider. He's going to open up the ability for you to spend to get the guys you really think have a strong chance of producing in your lineup. So sacrifices have to be made sometimes. All right, that wraps it up. Only 2 games today. Keep it a little bit shorter. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Head over to researchfantasy.com. Sign up for our NBA mailing list. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @ResearchAndWin. And join us again tomorrow.